Today's short story contains adult content, including sexual objects and images and language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello to all who are tuning in to another short story episode of Ink to Paper Stories and Interviews. I am your host, H.A. Spector. Like always, before we jump into today's short story, before I bring on today's reader and guest, it's our first short story with two guests, but we'll let the other one be a surprise. But before we jump in, I just want to say thank you all for tuning in and thank you all for giving this short story a listen, because the goal of these types of episodes is always to give, authors and writers a platform to share their work in an audio format, which, there's not necessarily a ton of opportunity for that. And so it's my way of trying to provide a platform for them to share that. And so it's really awesome that you're here to listen, because it shows, any sort of engagement is good engagement for the author typically. And so thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this episode. I also want to take a moment to mention, as always, that every story read on the podcast is written by the author, who holds the copyright for the material. Any reproduction of the art is not allowed without the sole written permission of the artist. So let's get on with today's short story, and welcome back to the show, author Randall Madden, and for the first time, because we have a full cast production of the short story being read today, let's welcome back Jessi to the show as well.
Yay. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. We're so excited.
I'm excited. As I was sharing with you guys all before we started recording, I'm stoked for this story. Congratulations on being the first story that requires a content warning. That is an achievement you should all be proud of.
Oh, I'm so proud.
And I'm excited for our listeners to get a chance to listen to it. So without further ado, Randall, I will turn it over to you to give us whatever introduction you like, and then to proceed with the reading of today's short story.
I think I will dispense with the introduction. I'm going to let it speak for itself. So we're just going to jump right into it.
Love it.
The Package by Randall Madden. In a million lifetimes across the radiated wastelands of what used to be New York, I never would have imagined I'd be crashing a helicopter into the roof of a sex shop. Yet here we are. It's my fault, really. That dumbass Gooch told me he ran pre-flight maintenance, and that should have been my warning. Instead, I took him at his word, and then we were falling out of the sky, dashboard screaming like a cat in heat.
We don't want to crash here,
Lily said. She held a white-knuckle grip on the doorframe, trying to maintain her footing.
This is scaver territory.
Do you think I'm aiming for the giant light-up cock? This isn't my preferred landing zone either.
I don't mind,
Missy said from somewhere in the back. All of you shut the fuck up and find a seatbelt. This is going to be a hard landing. Poor choice of words, I thought as the phallic roof decoration filled the windscreen. We slammed into the building halfway down the shaft, the props performing the gnarliest circumcision in history as they exploded. The heli rolled onto its side, everyone in the back too stupid to take my advice, slamming into the walls. Curses and loose gear bounced around in the chaos, and then it was over. I slapped the release on my harness, climbing out of the pilot's seat. Anyone hurt? Lucky's dead, someone muttered. Missy devolved into a cackling fit. Fuck. Not a good start. I started to organize the team. Get the package, I said, gesturing to the box as I opened the rear door. We'll be crawling with scavers and dregs soon. We need to be moving.
Through scaver territory?
Lily trilled. Do you have a better idea? I asked. Reapers, move out. Missy and Jacob were the first two down the ramp, rubbing Lucky's lifeless head for luck. Missy laughed again at the tradition that had lived longer than its owner. They fanned out to clear the roof, Lily following with her shotgun raised. I strained as I pulled Milo from his seat, watching as he stretched to his full height. He was one of the few dregs that still had a mind, and the twisting effects the radiation had on his DNA caused him to tower above me. He looked about dimly as he gathered his gear. You straight, Milo? Fine. He gathered his ridiculously oversized rifle in his arms and glared at me through the rad burns and pock marks that made up his face. We kill now? I smiled, turning his rifle so that the business end wasn't pointed at his chest. You're goddamn right, buddy. We kill now. I joined Lily and Gooch at the bottom of the ramp, the package strapped to Milo's broad back. I didn't know what was inside. That wasn't part of the job description. The money was lucrative enough to deny any curiosity that might have formed. I stepped gingerly around the open hole we'd left in the roof, through which the ridiculous roof ornament had fallen. I peered into the dusty shadows below to see it hanging precariously from several electrical wires. "Where to?" Jacob asked, his scope scanning the streets below us. I flipped the switch on our emergency transponder. "With any luck, Gooch isn't on the chems, and he'll be in the reserve heli and headed this way. Assuming you paid attention to details when I handed out orders this morning."
You mean like those details?
Lily motioned to the crashed heli and the pile of broken penis bits behind us. "Shut the fuck up," I growled, moving to take the lead. "We have to get to a clear rooftop, and fast." I scanned our immediate surroundings, pointing out a likely candidate. Its rooftop was clear of debris and obstructions, and the streets around it left plenty of room for the heli's approach. There. We moved down, through this building, and across the street quickly. "Keep it quiet. They'll be on our position soon." As the words left my mouth, I heard the first drums echoing through the streets below. Jacob turned to face me, looking paler than normal. "Boss." "Scavers." "Shit." "You want me to start shooting?" "No. Let's move. With any luck, we can be out of here before they zero in on us." The team fanned out in admirable speed, and we swept into the darkness through a rickety stairwell. The rusty steps creaked under each foot and outright groaned as they took Milo's weight. I winced inwardly, afraid that he would combine with the suspended decoration to send us all to a ridiculously comical death. The sad part was, no one would be there to laugh when it was over. We reached the second floor without issue, and suddenly we were among plush carpets and shelves of naked bodies, body parts, and bottles of stuff guaranteed to help body parts fit into naked bodies. I shook my head at some of the ridiculous shit as we passed. Missy stopped to hold a revealing pair of panties against her hips, and Lily slapped Jacob's face when he stared. "Focus," I reminded. We made it to the door. We were practically there. I could see the entrance to the building across the street. I moved quickly across the open bottom floor, slipping in piles of videos that had spilled from their shelves as the roof came apart above. I risked one glance up, the giant decoration swaying its precarious harness, and tried not to imagine what would happen if it fell. The faster we were out of this place, the better. Lily peered out into the street before shouldering her way through the door. She was met immediately by rounds sparking off its surface, tearing posters of scantily clad figures to ribbons. Luckily, she was able to roll clear and back into the building. "Shit, we're surrounded," Jacob muttered. Milo growled and stomped toward the door, but I grabbed his shoulder harness as he walked by. "Not yet, buddy. You aren't bulletproof." Somewhere along the way, he'd turned his gun toward himself again. I corrected his error, wondering how long it would be until he ended up buying the farm for his stupidity. We all scrambled for cover as more rounds started tearing through the walls and the drums grew louder. Despite my warning, Milo held his ground and started dropping shells through the doors. We all covered our ears as the deafening blasts tore watermelon-sized holes in the wall, ripping the doors off their hinges and showering us all in half-hardened sex jelly.
"Knock it off, dumbass!"
Lily yelled. She ran a hand through her hair, grimacing as it came away sticky.
"I'm never gonna get this shit off."
Milo finally let off the trigger, stooping to reload his weapon. Everything was quiet outside, but I knew better than to assume he had scared them off. They were planning, too. "Gooch may have to just get us from this roof," Jacob said. "Yeah, maybe, but it's going to be too hot for him to come in if we don't do something. We need to make a move." On cue, another barrage of bullets tore into the building. We threw ourselves flat once more, trying to ignore the contents that spilled over our gear and clothes. The floor was becoming too slippery to move. 3 puffs of red exited Milo's shoulder, and he groaned as he fell to one knee. He raised his weapon to return fire, and something big hit the outside of the building. There was a blinding flash of light, and we were all tossed among the rubble and sex toys as part of the wall disintegrated. I shook my head, trying to stop coughing in the smoky air. "Who's hit?" No one answered me immediately. I glanced around, happy to see that everyone was at least stirring. Milo was unmoved, still on one knee, his skin shredded by the passage of glass and metal bondage implements. I moved to him to check his wounds, pulling a butt plug from his left eye socket. As always, the tough bastard didn't make a sound. Missy was at my side a moment later, checking him for further injuries. "Help him up," I said, turning to see shadows moving through the gaping hole that had been blown in the wall. I shouldered my weapon and started shooting, dropping the first handful as the others ducked into cover. Larger figures moved among their numbers. Dregs. They carried blades, one of them picking up a mannequin decked out in lingerie from the rubble to use as a club. Jacob's rifle fired from somewhere nearby, dropping the first of them in a messy heap. I dropped back as rounds pelted the room. Missy had finally pulled Milo back to his feet, absent-mindedly grabbing his rifle from his hands and turning it around. Before I could yell, Milo pulled the trigger. For once, it had been pointed in the right direction. Milo exploded in a shower of flesh and broken gear, tossing Missy to the side. The package slipped free and slid through the piles of movies and overturned shelves, and I dived to cover it. At that point, I would have rather died than go back to explain this clusterfuck empty-handed. Lily was back in the fight now too, and we put a hammering on the dregs as they came. Those that didn't die immediately were losing their balance in the ridiculous ooze that was coating the carpet. Watching them die like that will haunt me for the rest of my fucking days. Still, better them than us, and we kept shooting. A rumbling cry filtered into the room, shaking my ribcage in its intensity, and then the biggest fucking drag I have ever seen tore its way through the chaos. It was at least 10 feet tall, and the scabbers had armored it with welded steel plates that looked like they were attached directly to the beast. Our bullets bounded harmlessly from this improvised armor as it lowered a cannon and opened fire. Leather outfits and magazines erupted in fire as we crawled deeper into cover. I met Missy beneath an overturned shelf as penis candies bounced from our gear. She grinned at a particular picture in an open magazine before pushing it out of the way. "Any ideas?" I asked. Missy indicated with the barrel of her weapon.
"Shoot the cables,"
she said. I looked in the direction of her weapon's muzzle and realized what she was saying. "You're insane, Missy."
"Nah, I've just been thinking about that thing ever since you cut it in half."
With a laugh, she leaned around the corner and threw another burst of fire at the dregs. "Jacob!" I yelled. The sniper snapped his head toward me. I indicated the plan, and a moment later he nodded in realization. Lily stepped forward as the beast reloaded, racking her shotgun and firing, again and again, closing on the monster for maximum effect. Jacob's rifle reported nearby, but I couldn't check to see if it was working. Lily didn't know the plan, and it was about to go badly for her. I stepped out of cover, bullets from the freshly arrived scabbers cutting through the room as I sprinted to Lily. "Lily, get down!" The monster dreg was finishing its reload, turning its gaze on Lily. With a grumbled laugh, it aimed the weapon toward her. Jacob's weapon went off again, and I took Lily out with a flying tackle. The monster's cannon went off once more, tearing the floor to pieces and accelerating our flight. We hit the ground hard, sliding through the floor's coating and into a pile of boxes. A loud crash sounded nearby, and for a moment, the room was silent. I turned to find the dreg squashed beneath the roof ornament, freed from its temporary moorings to come down directly on the monster's head. Most of the scabbers were in full retreat now, Lily and Jacob harassing them with fire. Missy had found a riding crop somewhere in the debris and was strangling a scabber to death with it. We met in the middle of the room, surrounded by dead scabbers, slain friends, and enough porn to kill an army. Missy was already laughing again, squishing her foot in the disturbingly soft floor.
"Slick save, eh, boss?"
I couldn't even laugh as I retrieved the gore-smeared package from beneath some broken boards. Maybe it would be funny later. "To the roof," Jacob suggested. "Yes, to the roof." I dropped the package on the client's desk, shuddering as I thought of what we'd gone through for this retrieval. She smiled gleefully as she moved to open it.
"Was it a hard run?"
she asked. I took the money and turned to leave the room. "I don't want to talk about it."
"You have no idea what these things are worth now. People will pay a fortune for their retrieval."
Curiosity got the better of me, and I turned back to watch as she opened the box. The packaging inside was shiny and new, definitely pre-war, insanely well preserved. However, as she gently cut the tape and pulled out the contents, I groaned. A vibrator. A whole fucking box of them. You've got to be fucking kidding me. The end.
Oh, what an awesome story. Thank you so much, Randall. And thank you so much, Jessi, for providing the vocals on there as well. Great storytelling. I love that story because I love the comedicness of it, as well as the setting. This, like, it gives like post-apocalyptic Fallout or cyberpunk or mixture of all of that kind of combined. And so it just makes for a really fun fun tale, and the twist at the end is just the sprinkles on the cupcake. I was trying to come up with a new one. So there we go. We'll go with sprinkles on the cupcake. Love that. Well, okay. So Randall, I have a few questions for you. Again, thank you so much for reading that. So can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to write this short story?
So I have a very small, tight-knit group of writers that I work with regularly. I have a wider group that I'm a part of, community-wise, but Jessi is one of those writers that, we have written so many stories together. And one of our early processes when we first started really writing together was to throw out a genre each week and maybe give a couple of rules about you have to do this or you can't do this. And I don't remember the particulars of what the rules were for this week, but I know that we were doing a post-apocalyptic story, dystopian. It had to be in that realm.
Yeah.
And I'm very driven by Fallout. I've always loved the universe because of the combination of just how bleak it is, but also how absurdly funny it is.
Yeah.
And, that absurdism in writing is something that Jessi and I both really appreciate. And we both try to include in our own writing when we can. And when I sat down to write the story, we gave each other a week to write it. And I think I didn't even get to start on it until the day that we were going to do the story. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to blast this out and see what happens. Because I have this absurd image of a helicopter crashing into a penis on the roof of a building.
I love that.
So, yeah. And that's where it all went from.
That's epic. Also, such a cool idea to just be like, hey, this week we're doing this. And these are the rules. And right. That's a lot of fun. I also love that, like I said, because because it gave Fallout, before you even said that you love Fallout, it gave Fallout vibes. And I agree with you, right? Like that setting, there's just something about that, like post-apocalyptic. It's not just the bleakness. I think it is that combination of the bleakness mixed with the humor that makes it so special and kind of stand out. And you captured that perfectly in this story. So as I read through, because I ask all of the authors coming on to read short stories, I ask them to provide a couple different samples so that I could take a look at both of them or a few of them and see which one I think might be a better fit for the podcast. And as I was reading through both of yours, I just noticed, the first thing I noticed, Randall, was that like these stories couldn't be further from each other. Like they are so different, setting and pace and just themes and topics and everything, genre. So like, would you consider yourself a writer of a particular genre? Like, is there a genre you really love? Or do you kind of love that challenge of just bouncing from genre to genre to genre to genre and you'll try anything?
So my stories do tend to sweep across most speculative elements. I do write some literary, but generally it's in speculative, especially in longer works. So literary is kind of just for, flash fiction for me. But I would say, I enjoy the challenge of writing across multiple genres, but I also feel inspired to write in them all because I read really widely and I get ideas, not just from books that I read, but also from, songs that I listen to.
Yeah.
And they'll kind of drive me to a genre that I want to explore. I would say that I tend to lean more into like genres that are driven by darkness, which is kind of funny considering what I just read, but
yeah.
Like most of my influences are from, dark fantasy, cosmic horror. I love the Berserk manga. I love H.P. Lovecraft's work. And a lot of my writing, I would say that if I had to settle into one genre, it would be dark fantasy.
Okay.
Because I enjoy the pursuit of like showing this world that is incredibly bleak and then what people who are willing to fight against that can accomplish. So,
yeah, that's really cool. Well, I love that because I actually like want to dabble more in dark fantasy, and it feels like such an interesting genre to me, or a subgenre to me, because for me, at least, my journey through it has been so hit and miss with like, and maybe I just don't know where to go. It's like kind of one of those things like, what do I read? Where do I go from here? And it's, it's because it's sort of niche. Give some, I know you gave a couple here, but is there any other like recommendations for anyone who wants to kind of jump into dark fantasy? Where should they start?
For me, a lot of it kind of depends what end of dark fantasy you want to drop into, because some of it has more in common with what we would consider traditional fantasy, medieval settings, things like that. And some of it is more fantastical, like, I feel like Berserk, even though Berserk has a medieval setting, it kind of falls more in that fantastical end. Another one that I really enjoy that to me still falls well within the dark fantasy realm is called Between Two Fires. It's, I know I'm going to mispronounce his last name, but it's by Christopher Buehlman, I think is how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
And it's a story that's set during the time of the Black Death. and it follows
Ooh.
a disgraced knight who is trying to get to the heart of what's happening.
Yeah.
But it creates this really interesting speculative bend to where, it's not just a matter of people are talking about the religion. The elements of the religion are there. So like there are actually demons walking the land. There are actually monsters and angels. And that's another one that I highly, highly recommend.
Speaking of the Black Death, have you played A Plague's Tale?
I have not.
I highly recommend it.
Okay.
First off, it's very narrative, very story driven, but it's also it's kind of inspired off of those events.
Okay.
It's also just, it kind of pulls on the heartstrings a little bit, but yeah, definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, that falls right in. Corruption is a big theme in a lot of my writing. Like, whether it's through disease or, exposure to something supernatural, that's always been a big theme. One of my favorite things in video games is in Elden Ring, the idea of the Scarlet Rot and seeing the land destroyed and like the greatest demigods brought down by it. I've always found that idea fascinating of like, being in that. Thankfully we're not in that, at the moment, but the idea of, that corruption being such a big driving force to the life around it. So
for sure. I also just love when you can cross over and you can kind of you start comparing books with video games and vice versa. And the storytelling that exists in both of those universes, but also just, they work so well with one another. And so I love when you see those parallels and those comparisons. And so that's really cool.
Yeah.
The last question I have for you is, actually I have a couple more questions for you if you don't mind, but so my next question would be, is there any characters in this story that were kind of inspired by a real person in your life?
No, I think I would be hesitant to say if it was the case because of the nature of this story, but no, these stories were these characters were completely off the cuff while I was writing. Just,
okay.
I wanted to put together a zany cast of mercenaries, like my own version of the A-Team, just, set in the A-Team in an X-rated movie, basically. So
I love it. Well, you did a great job at capturing those personalities and making them come to life off the cuff. Like each of them felt very distinct and unique and special. And it was a great job for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I have one more question for you, and this is more of just a general question. So Randall, what does your writing process look like when you're sitting down to tackle one of these ideas?
So usually I have a big build-up period to where I like allow an idea to formulate, especially on a longer project. Shorter ones like this can happen, within just a few hours a lot of times. But when I'm, my heart is really in like novel length works. So when I do that, usually it stems from some kind of premise or idea within a world, something about the setting, a way that magic works. Like my current work in progress, it came from I was actually listening to a deathcore album, and I had this thought of, a person, who was an honor guard who was ritually put to death for the princess that had passed away from their village. And they thought they were going to go to the afterlife and guard this princess forever. But then they woke up and they were in hell from a completely different religion. And then it's like, where do I go from here? So that's the inciting incident. He wakes up in hell. So what happens now? And to me, that's usually how my process starts. From there, I'll build my characters, try to figure out, what motivations drive somebody through this world. And a huge part of my writing process, Jessi and I will, riff ideas off of each other constantly. It's, hey, what about this works in your mind? And then we'll ask each other questions. And a lot of times the other one doesn't even speak. You just brainstorm out loud for 30 minutes. And then it's like, oh, thanks. I appreciate you helping me figure that out. So.
Yeah. That's so cool. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Randall, for taking the time out to come share a short story with us. Again, wonderful job. Loved the content, loved the story, loved the characters. Jessi, thank you so much again for being on and reading some of the dialogue there. Great voice work, by the way. Loved it.
Mm-hmm.
So wonderful job there as well. And so, Randall, before we say goodbye, can you just remind listeners where they can find you if they want to connect with you and your writing?
Sure. I have an Instagram page. It's going to be at Randall Madden Writes. And I have a website coming soon. Once it is up, I will have more information about that on my Instagram page. So that's the best place to find me right now.
Awesome. Well, we will put all of that in the show notes. Make sure you go out, you follow Randall on Instagram. That way you can stay connected to him and his works and his writing and his future website. So again, thank you so much, Randall. Thank you so much, Jessi. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Ink to Paper Stories and Interviews. If you enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to leave us a rating and a review on whatever podcast platform you use to access the episode. It's the best way to help the show grow and reach a wider audience. If you are a writer, author, or storyteller across any medium and you want to appear on a future episode of the show, please send me an email at h.a.spectorwrites@gmail.com or send me a message on Blue Sky at haspectorwrites.bsky.social. As always, keep promoting your local libraries, support your local community bookstores by buying books, including banned ones, and keep on supporting the storytellers you know and love. All of these things help support a healthy and thriving literary landscape, whether you are a writer or a reader. And I will catch you all in the next chapter.